I didn't go into the attic looking for answers. I went looking for a winter coat. My name is Natalie Brooks, I'm 27 years old. And this is the story of how my mother's old diary exposed my father's hidden identity and a family none of us knew existed. If you enjoy real-life stories like mine, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. The attic had always felt frozen in time, dust thick enough to leave fingerprints, boxes stacked without order, the faint smell of cardboard, old fabric, and memories no one had touched in years. My mom passed away 3 years earlier and my dad never went up there anymore. He said it made his chest tight. I believed him. That afternoon, I climbed the narrow ladder with no sense of purpose beyond practicality. I needed my coat, the one my mom bought me during my last year of college. I remembered exactly where she'd stored it in an old trunk near the back wall. The trunk was heavier than I remembered. When I lifted the lid, layers of folded scarves and sweaters greeted me, carefully arranged the way only my mother ever did. I smiled despite myself. Then I noticed something tucked beneath them. A small, leather-bound notebook. It didn't look dramatic. No lock, no warning. Just worn edges and a faded floral pattern on the cover. If it hadn't been hidden so deliberately, I might have ignored it entirely. Instead, curiosity nudged me forward. I sat cross-legged on the attic floor and opened it. The first few pages were exactly what I expected. Grocery lists, notes about my school schedules, little reminders to herself. I relaxed, feeling slightly foolish for expecting anything more. It felt comforting, like hearing her voice again. Then I reached an entry dated nearly a year before I was born. At first, nothing seemed strange. She wrote about exhaustion, about feeling stretched thin, about him being gone again. I assumed it was work travel. My dad traveled often when I was little. That part fit. But then a line stopped me cold. I hate lying to Natalie's grandmother. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. My mom's mother had died before I was old enough to remember her. Still, the sentence nagged at me. What lie about what? I flipped the page. Another entry. More tension. More secrecy. Then a name appeared. Not my dad's. I stared at it, convinced I'd misread. I read it again, slowly, carefully. The handwriting didn't change. The spelling was clear. The room felt suddenly smaller. I told myself it had to be a nickname. A friend, someone irrelevant. But the way she wrote about him, the way he makes promises, the way I keep hoping he'll choose us didn't align with anything I knew about my parents' marriage. My dad had always been steady, predictable, present, or so I thought. My hands trembled as I turned page after page. The entries grew heavier, more emotional. References to two lives, to guilt, to waiting, to fear of being found out. My heartbeat grew louder in my ears, drowning out the quiet hum of the house below. Then I reached the sentence that knocked the air from my lungs. I saw the other kids today. They look like him. Like Natalie might have in another life. I felt sick. Other kids. I closed the diary, pressing it against my chest, breathing shallowly as if I'd just surfaced from deep water. My mind scrambled for logic, for explanations that didn't involve the impossible conclusion forming in front of me. My dad had another family. Not an affair that ended. Not a brief overlap. A parallel life. I reopened the diary, desperate now, hunting for clarity even as dread crept in. Dates overlapped with my childhood. With birthdays. With holidays I remembered vividly. Christmas trips he said were work emergencies, late-night calls he took outside. Sudden schedule changes. Moments I'd never questioned because I trusted him completely. My mother had known. She had lived with the secret, carried it alone, written it down instead of saying it out loud. Tears blurred the ink as I kept reading, my emotions swinging wildly between disbelief and grief. Every memory I had felt unstable now, like a photograph slipping out of focus. I didn't know how long I sat there, minutes, hours, time lost its shape. Eventually, the attic felt too suffocating. I climbed down the ladder on unsteady legs, the diary tucked under my arm like contraband. The house looked the same. The walls didn't shift. The furniture didn't rearrange itself. But everything was different. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying my childhood through a new lens. Wondering how many moments had been shared. How many had been split. How my mother endured it quietly while protecting me from the truth. I realized something then that made my chest ache. This diary wasn't just a record of her pain. It was a warning. And I had only just begun to understand what it was trying to tell me. In the next part, the lies would unravel completely and I would learn just how carefully my father had constructed the life I thought was real. I didn't want to keep reading, that was the strangest part. The diary sat on my nightstand only a few inches away, yet it felt radioactive. Like touching it again would make the truth irreversible. As long as it stayed closed, there was still a chance I'd misunderstood everything. That hope, fragile and irrational, was the only thing holding me together. But curiosity mixed with fear is a powerful force. The next morning, after my dad left for work, I made coffee I barely tasted and opened the diary again. This time at the kitchen table. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the pages as if the universe had decided this story deserved clarity. I flipped back a few months before the entry about the other kids, hoping context would soften the blow. It didn't. The entries became more specific. Names appeared more often. Locations I didn't recognize. Mentions of school events, illnesses, family arguments that had nothing to do with us. My mother wrote about watching my father leave the house with a suitcase, knowing he wasn't going where he said he was. About rehearsing lies for neighbors. About swallowing questions so I wouldn't hear them. One sentence made my chest tighten painfully. He's a different man with them, kinder, less tired. I felt an unexpected surge of anger, not at my dad first, but at the unfairness of it all. My mother had shared him, shared her life, shared the truth with no one. And I had grown up believing I had a whole father when in reality, I only had half of one. Then came the detail that shattered the last remaining illusion: a birth date. One of the other kids was born just 8 months before me. My vision blurred as the implication hit. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a short overlap or a brief affair that got complicated. This was deliberate, planned, a double life maintained with precision. I pressed my palms flat against the table, breathing through the nausea that rose in my throat. Memories began rearranging themselves against my will. The missed dance recitals. The games he promised to attend but didn't. The way he always seemed tired, stretched thin, emotionally distant even when he was physically present. I'd blamed myself for years. For not being interesting enough. For wanting too much. Now I understood why his attention had always felt rationed. My father hadn't failed accidentally, he had been dividing himself intentionally. The cognitive dissonance was unbearable. The man who taught me how to ride a bike, who packed my lunches, who hugged me when my mom died. That man existed. I knew he did. But so did the man in these pages, secretive, selfish, skilled at deception. Both were real, and that realization was worse than if he'd been entirely cruel. As I kept reading, my mother's emotional state became clearer. Her writing shifted from hope to resignation. Early entries spoke of ultimatums, of waiting for him to choose. Later ones sounded numb, practical, resigned to reality. I stay because leaving would mean losing everything, she wrote. And because Natalie deserves a stable home, even if it's built on silence. That line broke something open inside me. She hadn't stayed because she was weak. She stayed because she was trying to protect me. She absorbed the betrayal so I wouldn't have to, and my father let her. By the time I reached the final entries, my hands were shaking uncontrollably. The last page wasn't dramatic. It was short. If Natalie ever finds this, I hope she understands that none of this was her fault. Tears fell onto the paper, smearing the ink slightly. I whispered, I understand, even though part of me didn't yet. I closed the diary and sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. The kitchen clock ticked loudly, marking time in a life that no longer felt like mine. That afternoon, my dad came home early. He asked if I wanted takeout. He smiled the same way he always had, normal, familiar, and suddenly unbearable. Every word he spoke felt layered now, like I was listening for what wasn't being said. I studied his face, searching for cracks, for guilt, for anything that matched the man in the diary. I saw nothing. That terrified me more than anger would have. That night, lying in bed, I realized I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't avoid. I could keep the diary hidden and live with this knowledge alone, just like my mother had. Or I could confront it and shatter whatever fragile version of family we still had. Either way, the lie was already broken. And in the next part, I would have to decide whether I was brave enough to face my father and the truth he'd spent a lifetime hiding. I carried the diary around for 3 days without opening it again. Not because I didn't want answers, I had too many, but because every time I looked at it, my chest tightened. The weight of it wasn't physical. It was the knowledge that once I spoke the truth out loud, there would be no way to put my family back the way it was. My dad noticed something was wrong. He asked if I was sick, if work was stressing me out, if I wanted to go out for dinner and get a change of scenery. The normalcy of his concern made my stomach twist. I wondered how many times my mother had sat across from him like this, holding an entire secret in her body while he pretended everything was fine. The fourth night, I couldn't hold it in anymore. We were sitting in the living room, the TV murmuring in the background. When I muted it and said his name, my voice sounded steadier than I felt. Dad, I need to ask you something. He looked over, immediately alert. Okay, I stood up and retrieved the diary from my bedroom. When I placed it on the coffee table between us, his face changed instantly. The color drained. His jaw tightened. Where did you find that? He asked quietly. In the attic, I replied. You knew it was there. He didn't answer. I opened the diary to a marked page and slid it toward him. I read it. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. He didn't deny it. That was the moment everything collapsed. How long? I asked. How long did you have another family? He closed his eyes slowly, like a man bracing for impact. Before you were born, he said, and after, my hands curled into fists. So all of it was real. Yes, the word echoed in my head. I felt anger surge first hot. Disorienting, but it was tangled with disbelief and grief. You let me grow up thinking I had one father, I said. You let mom carry this alone. He rubbed his face, suddenly looking older than I'd ever seen him. Your mother asked me not to tell you. I laughed bitterly. That doesn't absolve you. No, he agreed softly. It doesn't. I demanded details then. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because the unknown was tearing me apart. He told me about the other woman, about the children, about the schedule he kept so carefully that neither family would collide. I thought I could manage it, he said. I thought I was protecting everyone. You were protecting yourself, I snapped. Tears finally appeared in his eyes. I loved you. I still do. The words felt inadequate. Love, without honesty, suddenly felt hollow. I stood up, pacing, my thoughts crashing into each other. Do they know about me? I asked. Yes. Did mom know about them? Yes. The room felt too small to contain all the pain suddenly exposed. She knew, I whispered. And she stayed, he nodded. She was stronger than I deserved. I felt something fracture inside me, then not just anger at my father, but a deeper mourning for my mother, for the loneliness she'd lived with, for the nights she'd written these words instead of screaming them when the conversation ended. There was no resolution, just exhaustion. I went to my room and locked the door like I was 15 again, needing distance to survive. The days that followed were tense and fragile. We spoke less. When we did, it was careful, guarded. The house felt different, like a stage set after the audience has left. My dad tried to be present, but everything he did felt performative now. Like he was afraid one wrong move would lose me completely. Extended family noticed the shift. Questions were asked. Answers were vague. At night, I lay awake wondering how many truths I didn't know yet. How many memories needed reinterpreting. How much of my identity had been built on something false. And then a new thought emerged. One I couldn't ignore. There were people out there who shared my blood, who knew my father in a way I never had, who had lived the other half of this story. The idea terrified me, but it also pulled at me. Quietly, insistently, because if my life had been split in two without my consent, maybe the only way forward was to see the whole picture. In the next part, I would do the one thing I never imagined: reach out to the family my father had hidden, and step into a world I was never meant to know existed. I didn't tell my dad when I decided to reach out. That choice felt important. This wasn't about him anymore, it was about me. About filling in the blanks of my own life that had been erased without my consent. Still, the idea terrified me. These people weren't strangers exactly, but they weren't family either. They existed in a space I didn't yet have language for. I found them through social media. It felt surreal scrolling through photos of faces that looked familiar in unsettling ways. My father's eyes, unmistakable, his crooked smile, a laugh frozen mid-moment that mirrored my own. I sat on my bed staring at the screen, my heart pounding. Realizing these weren't abstract other kids anymore, they were real people with real lives that had unfolded parallel to mine. I debated for days what to say. How do you introduce yourself to siblings who never knew you existed? How do you explain that your shared connection is also the source of so much pain? In the end, I kept it simple. Hi, my name is Natalie. This is going to sound unbelievable, but I think we share the same father. I recently found out, and I'm not looking to cause harm. I just want to understand. I stared at the message for a full minute before hitting send. Once it was gone, there was no taking it back. The reply came the next day. It was from Claire, the oldest. She wrote cautiously, but not unkindly. She said she'd suspected for years that something was off about their family timeline, that their dad was often absent too, emotionally and physically. She said the message shocked her, but it also explained things she'd never been able to piece together. She asked if I wanted to talk. My hands shook as I typed yes. Our first phone call was painfully awkward. We stumbled over small talk, both clearly unsure what rules applied here. We shared basic details, ages, jobs, cities, the weather, even anything safe. Then she asked the question we were both avoiding. Did you know about us? No. I said quickly, I swear, I found out through my mom's diary. There was a long pause on the line. Our mom knew about you, she said finally. She told us years ago. That revelation hit harder than I expected. I wasn't just late to the truth, I was the last to know. She explained that their mother had framed it as something to be handled, Quietly, something adult they shouldn't interfere with. They were told not to reach out, not to disrupt anything, not to complicate things. Our shared father had managed to control the narrative on both sides over the next few weeks. Conversations became more frequent. I spoke to Claire, then to her younger brother Ethan, then eventually to their sister Maya. Each interaction carried its own emotional weight: curiosity, sadness, resentment, relief. Meeting them in person happened slowly, cautiously. The first meeting was at a coffee shop halfway between our cities, neutral ground, public, safe. When I walked in and saw them sitting together, I froze. It felt like walking into a mirror that didn't reflect exactly, but close enough to make my chest ache. The resemblance was undeniable. Not just in features, but in gestures, the way Claire tucked her hair behind her ear the same way I did. The way Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, identical to how my dad used to sit. We hugged awkwardly, sat down, smiled nervously. No one knew where to start. Eventually, stories filled the silence, childhood memories, gaps that suddenly made sense when placed side by side. We realized we'd experienced similar disappointments, similar absences, just explained differently. Where I'd been told dad's working late, they'd heard he's traveling. Different excuses. Same reality. There were moments of unexpected connection too. Shared humor, similar interests, a mutual frustration that felt oddly comforting. We weren't replacing anything, we were discovering something new, something complicated but real. Still, the emotions were heavy. I felt guilt for having grown up believing I was an only child. They felt anger for being asked to keep a secret that wasn't theirs. All of us felt manipulated. One afternoon, Claire said something that stayed with me. He split himself in half. She said quietly and expected us to be grateful for the pieces. That was it. That was the truth none of us had been able to articulate. Our meetings didn't magically erase the damage. There were moments of tension, awkward silences, questions no one could answer, but there was also honesty, something none of us had been offered before. When I told my dad I'd met them, he didn't yell, he didn't protest, he just looked ashamed. "I never wanted you to meet like this," he said. "That wasn't your decision to make." I replied calmly. For the first time, he didn't argue. Meeting my siblings didn't give me closure, it gave me context. It expanded the story of my life beyond the narrow version I'd been given. And as painful as it was, it also opened the door to something unexpected, a chance to rebuild not the family I thought I had, but the one that actually existed. In the final part, I would have to face what all of this meant for the future and decide how to move forward with a family that was suddenly much bigger and far more complicated than I ever imagined. Nothing went back to normal after that. I don't think it ever could have. Once the truth was fully out in the open, once the diary had been read, the confrontation had happened, and the other family had faces and voices, our old version of reality quietly collapsed. Not in one dramatic moment, but in small, irreversible ways. My relationship with my dad changed first. We were polite, careful, functional, but the ease we once had was gone. Every conversation carried the weight of what he'd done and what he hadn't said. I no longer saw him as just my parent. I saw him as a deeply flawed man who had made choices that rippled outward for decades. He tried, in his own way. He apologized more than once, though his apologies were often clumsy, tangled with justification and regret. I listened, but I didn't rush to absolve him. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't a single decision. It's a process. And sometimes it comes with boundaries. We didn't live together much longer after that. I moved out a few months later, needing space that wasn't soaked in history. Leaving didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like self-preservation. As for my siblings, using that word still feels strange. Sometimes we moved forward slowly. There was no instant closeness, no forced family moments. We let the relationships form naturally, without expectations. Some weeks we talked often, other weeks we didn't, and that was okay. What surprised me most was how similar our emotional journeys were. They'd grown up knowing about me but being told not to reach out. I'd grown up never knowing they existed. Different truths, same isolation. We all carried a version of loss that didn't have a clean name. Over time, shared experiences began to matter more than shared blood. We celebrated small things together: birthdays, promotions, random weekends where conversation flowed easily and no one pretended the past didn't exist. We laughed about how uncomfortable our first meeting had been. We compared childhood stories, noticing patterns that felt both painful and validating. Our father stayed mostly on the edges of those gatherings. That was his consequence. My mother's diary eventually found a permanent place in my home. Not hidden away this time. Not buried under dust and silence. I reread parts of it when I needed grounding. When I felt overwhelmed by the complexity of what we'd become. Her words reminded me that truth, even when delayed, still matters. I finally understood something she never wrote explicitly. Secrets don't protect families. They fracture them quietly. The hardest part of rebuilding wasn't accepting my father's betrayal. It was accepting that my childhood hadn't been a lie, just incomplete. The love I felt was real. The memories were real. But they existed alongside another story that deserved to be acknowledged too. Both could coexist. Redefining family took time. Family stopped being about titles and expectations. It became about honesty, choice, and mutual respect. It became about showing up without pretending. About allowing relationships to evolve instead of forcing them to look a certain way. I don't know what the future holds for all of us. Some relationships may grow stronger. Others may stay distant. That uncertainty no longer scares me the way it once did. Because here's what this experience taught me: you can survive the collapse of the story you were raised on. You can grieve a past that wasn't what you thought it was. And you can still build something meaningful from the truth. My dad's hidden identity didn't just reveal another family. It revealed how resilient I am. It showed me that love doesn't disappear just because it was complicated. And that sometimes expanding your understanding of family even when it hurts is how you finally step into your own strength. I didn't choose this story, but I chose what came next. And that choice made all the difference.